All right, this is going to be an interesting video. It's a video by request. A guy in my Gumroad, and if you're not part of my Gumroad, you got to sign up. We have a lot of fun. His name is Dylan. I won't say any more about him, but he's a funny guy. And he asked if he could sponsor a video. He wanted me to do a video about Charles Foster Ofdenson. And my first reaction is, I don't even know what the hell is that. Is that a philosopher? Who is he? I had no idea. And it turns out this is a comic character in an Adult Swim. Adult Swim, that was a channel, I think it was, that Sam Hyde was on. I saw some programs on there. They're kind of weird adult cartoons. Not adult like they're having sex, but you know what I mean. So, and they had a series that was called Metalocalypse. Metalocalypse. And I never heard of that. And Charles Foster Ofdenson was a character. So Dylan said, hey, would you do like a character analysis of Charles Foster Ofdenson? I'm like, well, okay. I don't know anything about this. So I downloaded some of the series. It was legal, I'm sure. I don't know. Sasha got it. I don't know. I got this series somehow, and I watched a bunch. I got an idea about the character, so I could do this video. And my first reaction was, boy, this is stupid. This is stupid. I can't do a video about this. Sorry, Dylan. It's just dumb. It's like the story is about a heavy metal band. It's fictional, obviously, called Death Clock. Death Clock. That's it. Death Clock. And they're like based in the Nordic or whatever. And they're kind of like Metallica a little bit. I don't know, but it's like a death metal band. They're super popular, and they're so popular their fans like die at concerts. And Death Clock loves this. The band members, they're all like gruesome, and people's heads explode, eyeballs pop out, blood everywhere, and they're kind of dumb. And I can see like how a young teenage boy would like it. You know, you're kind of being emo, and they have the heavy metal music playing. So the comic is really a satire in a sense. It's, if you guys ever watched the movie Spinal Tap, one of my all-time favorites, Rob Reiner, he's a shit lib, but it's a great movie. And they did a parody, kind of a mock documentary of a hair metal band in the 80s. And it was funny because they did all the tropes and everything. It was excellent. It's kind of like this. It's a parody of the death metal bands, you know, how outrageous they are, and the style of music and all the violence and the being real dark, because they're always about being dark and bloody and edgy and violent. So that's the premise. And I thought, well, you know, I can see how a teenage boy would like this, but I you know, at my age, I don't find this very interesting. It just seems kind of stupid. But then I looked into this character, Charles Foster Ofdenson. I'm like, well, what he is, he's kind of like the CFO, they call him. He's like the band manager, while Death Clock, they're all like crazy, you know, typical not hair metal, like death metal band members that are into violence. Whereas Charles Foster, he CFO, they call him. He is, you know, straight lace. He's a suit guy. So the band represents chaos and energy and destruction. And CFO, Charles Foster Ofdenson, his role is to try to contain that so they don't get into too much trouble and the band makes money. And he's very serious. He's very logical. He's not necessarily judgmental of the band that they end up killing all these people. He doesn't really care about that. He just cares about making money and trying to help them along, because the band members they're like incompetent. They can't do anything except play their metal music. And that's the basic idea of the cartoon. And you know, and Charles Foster, he has you know, ninja abilities and all that. It's kind of a cool character. So I was thinking, well, how does this relate to anything? And I thought, okay, well, let's go back to a boomer, because it's someone that would have liked Metalocalypse, is, you know, like a millennial type person would like that. I get it. But let's go back to the old boomers days. And there's something that kind of reminded me of this, where you have the chaos represented by Death Clock, right? And then CFO, Charles, he represents the lawful, the organization. And I thought that's an interesting tension how they work together that way. And there was a movie in 1962 that really discussed the same topic. It's weird putting these together, but they kind of very similar. And it was a movie called one of the best westerns, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. A couple of my favorite actors, John Wayne was in it, Jamie Stewart. And what it was is Jimmy Stewart played a role of a senator. He became later a senator. His name was Ransom. John Wayne was like a rancher named Tom. And what happened when Jimmy Stewart and his family first went to this Western town years ago? It's kind of near the closing of the West. There was a guy named Liberty Valance, and he was like the bully or he was the outlaw terrorizing the town. And John Wayne, though, was kind of he was a good guy, but he kind of operated outside of the law himself, and he knew how to take care of Liberty Valance. Liberty Valance was scared of Tom. That was a John Wayne character. Whereas Jimmy Stewart, he was a lawyer, and he goes, "No, we can't just have this vigilante type of atmosphere in the Old West anymore. We got to bring in courts. We got to have procedures. We got to have a certain law and order of how we do things." So the whole movie, the theme of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, was kind of a review of where you have a chaotic situation and Tom, meaning he's a good guy, but he didn't necessarily feel constrained by the law. And he said, well, there hardly is any law. And the only thing that Liberty Valance is going to fear is my gun. You got to stand up to these bullies. Whereas Jimmy Stewart's character's Ransom, he represented, no, 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 we got to have courts, laws, and procedures, and we can't operate in this fashion anymore. We're coming into a new age. And it's a quintessential American Western because it sort of represented a closing of a time in American history. Because the West, the Western frontier, we still have the spirit to a degree, not as much anymore in America. But when I was a little kid, I still detected it a little bit. It still exists in the country a little bit, like in Texas and rural areas. The idea of the cowboy, meaning independent, you make your own way. It's like get the government off of me. I do things my way. I make my own life. That was kind of like the John Wayne character Tom. And then you have the Jimmy Stewart character Ransom, which is like, no, well that's fine in like a frontier setting, but we gotta make things more structured and get some more order to it. And it sort of typified the change America started to go through. And I'll get into that some more if that's good or bad, but that's what's happened. So it those two. So you have Metalocalypse, and then you have the Man Who Shot Liberty Valance that I think really dealt with the same themes. So in Metalocalypse, the character that the band Death Clock kind of represents just randomness, right? They're chaotic, sort of like John Wayne's character Tom. And then you have CFO, the manager. He's kind of like Jimmy Stewart. He's trying to have structure to all this. He's kind of the lawful character. And you see, I remember this tension. I used to play a game called Dungeons and Dragons, and I still do the new version. And I'll let you guys know when that's online. But I used to play the old version, and they had something called your alignment. And alignment is an axis of lawful and chaotic and good and evil. So, for example, you could be lawful good, or you could be chaotic good, or lawful evil, or chaotic evil. And lawful meant you kind of follow a certain way, orders and procedures, whereas chaotic, you kind of do your own thing. It's more of a liberty, freedom base. It can be chaotic. It doesn't mean that you're evil or good, but it's just the way you approach life. Whereas good and evil are the traditional, like Christian definitions of the term of how we looked at things. Now, in the new Dungeons and Dragons, they don't have that anymore. Even back in the day when I played in college, we'd get into huge arguments because back in the day, if you had like a lawful good character, if you didn't follow your goodness, so to speak. Let's say you had a paladin, you may lose some powers, or your magic sword won't work anymore because you did not follow the good behavior. But then, even in college, I played as a freshman in college. We get into these huge metaphysical debates, like what is good, what is evil, and we don't really have that definition as a society anymore, because of cultural relativism. So Dungeons and Dragons put that out of the game, but I think it's still valid. And if this these two franchises, or the Metalocalypse, you had the chaos with the band Death Clock, and then you had their manager, which represented order. Now, I would say the band Death Clock would represent chaotic evil, and by evil, because there's a lot of death and destruction. I mean, they could be good guys, but what they did was kind of evil, and they're chaotic. There's just like no control. They're just out of control all the time. Whereas their manager, Charles, he was okay with the evil, so I'd have to say he was evil, but he was lawful. He kind of kept everything together, kept them okay with the law and all that type of thing, the contracts. So that's an example. Now, who shot the man who shot Liberty Valance? I think the Jimmy Stewart character, the guy that played Ransom, the senator, the guy that was a lawyer, he represented lawful good, right? He was a good guy. Jimmy Stewart typically played a good guy, and he was very lawful. We got to follow the rules. We got to follow the law. We just can't dispense justice on our own. Whereas John Wayne's character, Tom, was like that. That's not realistic. This is a frontier. I got to dispense justice. And Liberty Valance, he's not going to respect you. He doesn't give a shit about your laws, but he cares about my gun. He's scared of my gun. So John Wayne would represent like chaotic good. So he's good, but he didn't really follow lawful structure. And so I do think this is interesting, and to really watch the movie, the man who shot Liberty Valance. I keep wanting to say who shot Liberty Valance. I won't spoil it for you. The movie goes into that. And then the cartoon series Metalocalypse is kind of interesting too in this way, because it deals with these themes. And I think these are themes that are still applicable in how we live our lives, and in a greater sense, what America is. In America, I think we kind of started like chaotic good with the frontier. And we were chaotic because we were such a big, wide open area, the Western expansion, the frontier. And I think mostly people were pretty good because they had their church or religion, not everyone. And they would get together and get a sheriff to deal with the bad guys and that sort of thing. But over time, we kind of morphed into more of the law, where you have courts, or you have the justice system, where you couldn't take the law in your own hands anymore. And that's fine. I think you need that. But it's interesting how we become, as a country, sort of evil now. And we have our government, I would call right now, as lawful. They have all this law around everything, but it's very evil. And we kind of have a macro tyranny, whereas like if you're a criminal that wants to rob someone, stab them, and take their money, let's say New York City, if you're like black, you're not going to go to prison because Black Lives Matter. But if you resist a mugger and you hurt a mugger, you're going to jail for 10 years. See, this is where it's twisted into lawful evil. And you have this in our lives, how you live your lives, and you have personalities that always want to follow the rules and do the right thing. And I think that's important. You need those people, like Jimmy Stewart's character. I think his name was Ransom Stoddard. And you need it like Charles Foster, CFO, and Metalocalypse. You need someone to hold that together. But you also need that creative freedom. You need the individuals that are kind of weird or off or do different things, because that gives some interesting insights. Myself, I think I've always said I'm more on the chaotic side. I hope I'm good. Sometimes maybe I'm evil, but I'm definitely more on the chaotic side. I don't like rules. I don't like policies. I resisted against all the COVID mandates, the mask. I just hate bureaucracy. Even when I was in the business world, that was a problem I had, is like, why are we doing all this paperwork, all this bullshit? It doesn't help. Doesn't help what we're trying to do. But then you have a lot of people that just love that. They love processes. They love the documentation. So much so they sometimes lose sight of really what's important. And in that environment, it gets very bureaucratic and stifling, and you no longer have the innovation of like nerdy guys just working freely, thinking of fun ideas or clever ways to solve the issue. So I think it's kind of a yin yang. You need both in a society. Personally, I'm more on the chaotic side. That's why I would never be a good leader of like a movement or anything, because I'm not one to try to organize everything and fit everyone together and all that. I've always been somewhat of a loner. It's just my style. I'm introvert by nature. I'm fine kind of just doing my own thing. I love people. I have friends, don't get me wrong, but I'm fine by myself. It doesn't bother me whatsoever. And I think this is sort of the theme in these two is we always got to consider where we are and what's the good way to be. So are we going to be lawful or chaotic? And are we going to be good and evil? And I think lawful and chaotic, there's a place to both, but I mean, we should always strive for the good. Anyway, it's a different type of video. I hope you guys like it. Thank you, Dylan, for the suggestion. I hope you liked it. I'll talk to you guys later.